Yep, resume broadcasting. Thank you. Just let me know, clerk.
That's us live.
Okay, so that's us back in broadcasting, members, and we're moving on now to agenda item 9, which is the sign language bill. So, members, we were due to be briefed today by the Foyle Deaf Association, but unfortunately they advised they were not able to attend. A copy of their submission is at page 457, and a copy of their presentation is at page 36 of table papers. So there's also a copy of a submission from the Deaf Women's Group NI, which is at page 477. Are members content to include a copy of each of these submissions in the final committee report? Yep, thank you. Members, at page 497 is a raised paper following a query from the committee on a review of costs associated with sign language legislation in Britain, Scotland, Wales, must have been England, Scotland, Wales, and the south of Ireland. The Assembly's raised team, from the Assembly's raised team, can I now welcome Aidan Stennett. Aidan, very welcome to the meeting to brief us in relation to the detail in the paper. So Aidan, if you want to please go ahead and brief members, and then we'll move to questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I previously briefed the committee on the costs associated with the sign language bill back in February. You'll recall at the time I noted that the bill's explanatory and financial memorandum contained limited financial information. It noted that the bill is an enabling bill and stated that it would have no immediate financial implications, but the costs could be incurred in the future when the department implements the powers that it provides. During that presentation, members had questions about the cost of sign language provision in other jurisdictions, and that is what the briefing today has explored, with a focus on Great Britain and the Republic of Ireland. It's perhaps best if I begin with some caveats. It's difficult, if not impossible, to compare the cost of provision across jurisdictions, and there are two reasons for this. First, sign language provision in each jurisdiction is different. That's explained in greater detail in the raised bill paper that the committee received back in February. Secondly, the Northern Ireland Sign Language Bill is, as I've said, an enabling bill. We do not know, for example, which public bodies which will be designated as prescribed organisations, nor do we know the contents of the guidance those organisations will be required to follow. So we really aren't clear on what we're comparing to in this case. So within that context, direct comparison between jurisdictions should be treated with caution. Instead, what this briefing has tried to do is identify categories of costs which have occurred in other jurisdictions. So looking first at the UK example, the British Sign Language Act was introduced to recognise British Sign Language as a language of England, Wales and Scotland. It also replaced a requirement on the Secretary of State to report on the promotion and facilitation of BSL by ministerial government departments and to issue guidance on the use of BSL. At the time of its introduction, the UK government stated that the Act would impose no new costs. Although the bill did require government bodies to report, this was not viewed as being additional to the requirements that had been previously set out under the Equality Act 2010 and the Public Sector Equality Act. Since the Act was enacted, the UK government has issued 3 reports on how government departments have used BSL. The latest was published in July, and this report, like the 2 that preceded it, they did not include any detailed financial information. What they do reveal, and what might be interesting to the committee, is that not all departments have produced sign language communications, and this was largely a result of department functions, with those with limited customer-facing roles less likely to produce BSL materials. Turning to Scotland, the Scottish BSL Act 2015 required listed bodies to develop plans and raise awareness of BSL. Cost estimates at the time of the bill's passing anticipated that the Act's provisions would result in a yearly cost of £755,000. The largest proportion of that cost, £530,000, was attributable to the development of and reporting of BSL plans by listed authorities. The Northern Ireland Bill does not include a direct provision for prescribed organisations to produce plans, and is not clear whether this will be a feature of the guidance to be drawn up by the Department for Communities in the future. The bill does include provisions for the Department to report on the progress of the bill every 5 years. Other categories of costs that may carry over from the Scottish example to Northern Ireland include staffing costs at both departmental and public body level, and costs for engaging with the deaf community. The Welsh Bill was introduced in June 2025, and that's subsequent to the bill paper prepared by Reyes for the committee. As introduced, the bill contains provision for the Welsh Government to promote and facilitate BSL, publish a national strategy and report progress, provide guidance for public bodies, and appoint a BSL advisor and panel. Costing information produced by the Welsh Government estimated that the bill will have a total cost of between 3.8 and 4.1 million over a 10-year period. The largest proportion of this cost was attributable to funding to appoint a BSL advisor and the panel. Again, this is not a cost that is transferable to a Northern Ireland context, given the bill that's currently in front of the committee. The Welsh example does suggest that the Welsh Government anticipates some costs to be associated with the development of guidance. In the financial information, this is combined with the costs of producing a national BSL strategy, so it's not possible to disaggregate this cost. The total cost of developing strategy and guidance was estimated to be 106,000 over 10 years. And then finally, turning to the Republic of Ireland, as members will be aware, the ISL Act commenced in December 2020. A report was produced in 2021 reviewing the operation of the Act. This did not include any explicit information on the costs of meeting the Act's provisions. It did, however, note that only 20.9% of public bodies surveyed had ring-fence funding for ISL provision. In the Republic of Ireland, the Citizen Information Board provides funding to agencies with ISL responsibilities. This includes the Regulatory Centre for Irish Sign Language Interpreters. This centre provides a registration system for interpreters, and this is somewhat similar to provisions in the Northern Ireland Bill that concern a scheme for accrediting teachers and interpreters of BSL and ISL. In 2023, the Regulatory Centre for Irish Sign Language had a budget of just under €250,000. A review of questions and answers in the Oireachtas revealed other categories of costs that may be applicable in a Northern Ireland context, depending on the content of the final guidelines produced. These include things like providing interpretation of ISL at department events, funding a home tuition scheme, training staff in ISL, and providing ISL in court services and Garda Síochána. Similar to the GB example earlier, the review of questions and answers also revealed that some government departments in the Republic of Ireland reported limited ISL provision due to their role requiring limited public interaction. So thank you, Chair. That's all I wanted to cover. I hope it's useful to the committee, and I'm of course happy to take any questions.
It is actually useful just to set that overall context and sort of get a handle on what some figures might look like. And I have to say, in some degrees, while they're substantial figures, we are going to clearly need to invest more into this area as a result of this bill, and that's what the bill will create, and I think that's welcome. I suppose really the one thing that occurred to me before I come to members was around, I think it was that many departments didn't do anything, or some bodies didn't do anything because they felt they weren't customer facing. In relation to how that affects this bill, I suppose, is the fact that we have the criteria within it that where it's reasonable and practicable for departments, that they kind of almost self regulate that. So it's not a question as such, it's more a comment that would concern me, but I just want to, I suppose, compare and contrast as we go through that and as to how that might impact the implementation of the bill, and to ensure that there is, for example, my concern, I suppose, would be, frankly, people saying, well, we're not customer facing, so we're just going to turn our face against it, and that could lead to problems down the line, or people not getting that improvement that they would hope to see. But it's not a question, Aidan, but just something that your briefing has sparked of interest to me that I'll pick up later as we go through. Kelly.
Thank you very much, Aidan. Aidan, there's so while the financial outcome of the current bill that we have in front of us, we don't really have those figures at the moment, but what I'm concerned about is there's part of this bill that says about the duty of prescribed organisations and organisations to take reasonable steps, and in 3.2b it talks about there's nothing in this section implies that prescribed organisations are prevented from taking into account matters of affordability to them. My concern is that we've seen from the other areas that not everywhere is putting sign language into, or interpretation into place. In having something like that within the bill, does that not already given out to those prescribed organisations that if they could say it's too expensive to provide this?
I think we'll get into a bit of legal interpretation on that one. I don't think I can answer that.
Okay.
It may be a good question to direct to the department.
You don't think that matters of affordability was included in any of the other? You didn't find that in any of the other regions?
I didn't come across it. That doesn't mean it's not there. I wasn't specifically looking for that. I was looking at.
And the fact that this is an enabling bill, we could go completely daft here and throw a load of stuff into this bill that could cost a clean fortune. You know, I would be quite happy if there was a deaf primary school and a deaf secondary school in every sort of council area in Northern Ireland, which would cost a lot of money. So I'm just thinking, from our point of view, when we're taking forward, if we're taking forward any amendments to this bill, there will be financial implications. I'm just wondering how far we sort of can push this to make sure it's inclusive, to meet the needs of people who require sign language, whether it's British or Irish Sign Language, and this matter of affordability, because we want it to be good provision as opposed to just providing it. So I'm just wondering, was there anything that came out from the from your research into the papers about other governments and how they have had to consider that balance?
No,
Okay.
I didn't. I think the interesting, I think an interesting point in the Republic of Ireland example was that not all. I'm just going to check for the wording here. So not all departments had ring-fenced budgets, but also there was apologies. I'm just scanning the document. So 31% of bodies were unaware of the ISL Act, and 36% that they were only 36% stated that they were fully compliant. So I think there's an awareness question for the people that are going, or the organisations that are going to be subject to this, but also there's a budgetary question. I think it's in the context of a wider budget situation that's quite tight.
I think my concern is that we do have the Disability Discrimination Act here, and for instance, an organisation wouldn't be able to get away with not putting in, say for instance, ramps or different things, but the affordability measure means that they could get away with not providing interpretation for sign language. Was there anything with the amount of, say in the South, the figures that weren't aware, there doesn't seem to be anything in the paper there that says what the repercussions were for those?
No, and I'm trying to think back to the paper that came from. I don't think it went into very much detail. It was a survey, but I'm very happy to look at it again.
It'd be interesting to see, because one of the things that I am concerned about is if in the bill the Department for Communities says that it doesn't have the ability to sort of force anything on any other prescribed organisations, and then the affordability matter comes in. To me, if I was in any other department and had a tight budget, I was just going to leave that. We can't afford that. But there has to be something that sort of shows the deaf community that they are as recognised as any other part of society and will be provided for. Be interesting to see what that might be, what the repercussions are for other governments if departments do not deliver That would be good. No, thank you very much, Aidan. It's a really good paper and really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the paper actually becomes more and more useful as we go on, and it's very, very useful in that sense. And I suppose one of the things that occurs to me is, can we learn anything from Wales in relation to? So we know we're dealing with 2 sign languages here, but in Wales they're dealing with 2 core spoken languages. Is there additional cost to that, and can we ensure that those are seen as reasonable, given there are 2 clearly defined forms of sign language? Is there? And I get it that Wales are at the early stages themselves. So what's your thoughts on that, Aidan?
Sure, I'm really not sure about the sort of the policy side of that. It's not really my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's something that we as a service could look at for you.
Yeah. Well, I think for now, do we see? But I think what this will do is it kind of almost provides a bit of a template that you could almost estimate some costs, or kind of get an idea of what cost might mean. Morris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks very much, Aidan, for the paper. It's very informative. I have a couple of off-the-cuff questions, and it would be, what provision is there in the Republic of Ireland for BSL? Could you perhaps delve into that and what the costs are? Also, what the costs are for us here to develop 2 sign languages whenever the common one in use across these islands is a BSL. Kelly had a very, very valuable point there. Will people use the cost of providing something as a reason not to provide something? So if we had all the figures here in front of us, to me, a standard language across all the islands would be the way forward. So I'm just wondering, if we're making provision here in Northern Ireland for the Irish Sign Language, what provisions are being made in the Republic of Ireland for BSL?
Sure, again, we're sort of straying into stuff that is beyond the scope of the paper. The purpose of the Irish Sign Language Act was to promote Irish Sign Language. With regards to the cost of promoting two sign languages in Northern Ireland, the information that is available on the bill is limited. There is no cost information, so I can't comment on that at this stage.
But it will be something we need to consider down the line, the cost of providing things for this assembly. This is a great place for giving money. It's not ours away to anything. So there needs to be a bit of housekeeping taking place here, not just from what I'm talking about here, but right across the assembly. I mean, if you were in the assembly chamber for 4 weeks, you would think that this place here is coming down with money. The speed we give it away, we don't have it to give away, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I suppose.
Thanks, Aidan.
Yeah. Thanks, Morris.
Right, Chair, but we.
Yeah. No worries. I think for me, one of the very key acknowledged strengths of the bill is the approach to include both sign language, because if people are vulnerable because of additional communication needs, the fact that they're in a minority within a minority makes them more vulnerable of anything. So I think that's to be welcomed. I think that's something that, and as far as the cost argument goes, and it's valid and it's absolutely one that we must always take into account. But the discrimination that people potentially face and the benefit of opening up services in a fair and an equitable way, if it has a cost, then that, and it will have a cost, that's I think something that is absolutely valid that we will be looking at. But we'll have much more obviously on the bill as we go through. But I think if there's any other questions, go ahead, Pam.
Just a quick one. Thank you. And I need to read over again, and it's useful to have this information. I'm really getting up to speed as a new member on this committee and on this bill. But is there any reference in your paper to the cost of building capacity in order to deliver sign language? Is that, because clearly that is going to be, we know how pressured those services are, and we know that there's very heavy burnout of interpreters and a lot of reliance on the same people. So clearly there's a huge need to educate and to bring up, you know, so that we actually have the capability of delivering proper and rightly so sign language in both languages to ensure that people are not left out in the cold as they currently are. And I think it's something that I'm very passionate about, the fact that there's an entire deaf community who have been ignored and sidelined and left with no access to basic information, and that's just not right. So I welcome that we are where we are with this bill, and really looking forward to seeing more progress on it. But is there anything in your paper directly relating to the possible costs of building capacity?
Yeah, there's limited information on that. There are a couple of examples that came out from those questions and answers in the Oireachtas. So the Department for Education introduced an ISL home tuition scheme, which had a budget of €300,000 per year. And then there was so there was an example of the Irish Passport Service employing 2 members of staff who provide ISL interpretation and then training 4 additional members of staff. But unfortunately, there was no figures attached to that. So there are small examples, but it's limited. I think overall there is quite limited information about the spend and what is going on.
Yep. Sorry, just check, Pam, you?
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
It's just to follow up on Pam's point there. The explanatory and financial memorandum, as introduced, doesn't include any figures for the thoughts of the department moving forward on those sort of costs. I'm just wondering if we could go back and ask the department if they have any of those figures, because
they might have been working
on those, you know, just from our point of view, because it'd be useful to see their thinking on the costs of the bill. Now, the repercussions of the bill further down the line will be a different matter, because you know, if you're providing interpretation or sign language in other parts of government, front-facing staff, it'll escalate as time goes on. But at the moment, there's nothing within the financial memorandum that provides any costs for us. Yeah, we can do any comparison.
Members content we ask the department if there's any update on costs? Be useful to know. All right, and there may be. Members content with that?
Yeah.
Any other questions for Aidan then?
Oh, that's really good.
Oh, Aidan, thank you very much, and appreciate members. Clearly, we've all strayed outside of the remit of your brief, but out of curiosity, no reflection on your work at all. I think your work has just prompted some for the question, which is good. So thank you for that, and I think it'll be a very useful resource to refer back to as we go through the remaining stages. So thanks for that, Aidan. Okay. Okay, members, so we now do need to take, just to check before I go then, any follow-up actions in relation to that. So Kelly has identified and we've agreed one there. I did want to say at page 512 there's a copy of the Belfast Statement on Mental Health and Deafness. And Kelly, I believe you'd asked for that to be included in papers this week. Just checking, do you want to say anything in relation to that?
Just very quickly, I've been talking to Brian Symington, amazing gentleman, and John Carberry. They have been leaders on campaigning for sign language for some years, and this was something that was agreed way back in 2014. And this is part of why this is so important, why the sign language bill is so important, and why we need to ensure that, see this provision of affordability, that we take that into consideration, because if we don't enable translation and interpretation to be provided for something like mental health, then we're leaving people out, you know, and we can't do that. So it's a difficult one for me, that that part that's currently in the bill about matters of affordability would take precedence over the needs of deaf people. Yeah. So, but Brian and John are amazing men. I would recommend to anybody to have a conversation with them. Yeah.
Good. And I have also, and I agree, they are exceptional activists and that, and experts in all of that field. So that certainly is. I would agree with you there. Okay. So anything else then, members, in relation to that before we take another short break then to allow the interpreters to finish up their interpretation? Bring that off screen, and then we'll come back into session. So go ahead, Kitty.
Committee Room 29. Sound.